Chapter 5. The Hungry House. Ethan lasted exactly 18 hours. 18 hours of Lena's careful smiles and measured conversations, of the way she moved through their house like she was navigating a minefield, of the sounds she'd made in the kitchen that night, not quite dragging, not quite scraping, but something that had made him lock their bedroom door and push a chair against it. 18 hours of watching her watch him, of catching her staring when she thought he wasn't looking, of the growing certainty that the woman making him coffee and asking about his day was performing an elaborate charade for an audience of one. "I need some space," he'd finally told her that morning, throwing clothes into the same suitcase she'd packed for him the night before, just a day or two, to think. The relief that had flashed across her face before she'd hidden it behind concern told him everything he needed to know. "Are you sure that's safe?" she'd asked, but her hands were already moving, tidying things that didn't need tidying, creating distance between them. "What if something happens while you're gone?" "You managed before I knew about any of this," he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You'll manage now." She'd walked him to the door, kissed him goodbye with lips that felt like ice against his skin, and whispered, "Don't stay away too long." But as he'd driven to the cheap motel on the outskirts of town, Ethan had known he was making a mistake. Not because of any supernatural threat, but because he was abandoning someone who needed help, whether that someone was his wife or something else entirely. The motel room was everything their house wasn't: cramped, dimly lit, smelling of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaning product. But it was also something their house hadn't been in months: quiet. No sense of being watched, no peripheral movement, no feeling that the walls themselves were listening to his thoughts. For the first time in weeks, Ethan slept deeply. He woke to 17 missed calls from their home security system. The alerts had started at 3:47 a.m. and continued every few minutes until dawn. Motion detected. Glass breakage detected. Motion detected. The notifications formed a pattern of escalating chaos that made his hands shake as he scrolled through them. By the time he pulled into their driveway 20 minutes later, Ethan could see the damage from the street. Every window facing the front yard was shattered, glass glittering like diamonds across their carefully maintained lawn. The front door hung open, revealing darkness beyond, and carved into the white siding next to the entrance, in letters deep enough to see from 50 feet away, was a single word: "Looped." Ethan sat in his car for several minutes, engine running, phone in his hand with 911 already dialed but not yet called. Whatever had happened here, whatever had torn through his house like a hurricane of rage, calling the police would only raise questions he couldn't answer. Questions like why his wife was nowhere to be seen, despite her car still sitting in the garage. Questions like what could cause this much destruction without triggering a single noise complaint from their distant neighbors. Questions like why he'd driven away from someone he claimed to love when she'd begged him to keep watching. The front door creaked in the morning breeze, a sound like bones settling. Ethan turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, his feet crunching on broken glass as he approached what had been his sanctuary. The interior was worse than the exterior suggested. Their living room looked like a war zone. The sectional sofa had been flipped and torn apart, stuffing scattered across the hardwood like snow. The coffee table was overturned, its glass top shattered into a spiderweb of cracks that somehow held together. Books had been pulled from shelves and thrown with such force that pages were embedded in the walls like paper shrapnel. But it was the mirrors that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. Every reflective surface in the house had been systematically destroyed. Not just broken, obliterated. The bathroom mirrors were punched through, leaving jagged holes surrounded by spiderwebs of fractured glass. The mirrored closet doors in their bedroom hung in twisted strips, reflecting his fractured image back at him in dozens of distorted fragments. Even the small decorative mirrors in the hallway had been smashed with surgical precision, as if something had moved through the house with the specific intent of eliminating every possible reflection. And everywhere carved into walls and furniture and door frames were more of those symbols, the same angular marks Lena had drawn in blood on their dining room table, but deeper now, more violent, as if whatever had made them had been consumed by rage. "Lena," Ethan called, his voice echoing strangely in the destroyed space. "Lena, are you here?" No answer, but as he moved deeper into the house, he began to find traces of her passage. A streak of what looked like blood on the kitchen wall at about shoulder height. One of her shoes, inexplicably sitting in the middle of the dining room floor. A piece of her nightgown caught on the splintered remains of their banister. It was in their bedroom that he found the drawing. The paper was taped to what remained of their dresser mirror, held in place by 4 strips of medical tape that suggested careful, deliberate placement. The image was rendered in what looked like charcoal mixed with something darker, maybe blood, maybe something worse. It showed a figure that was recognizably him, but wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the face too angular, the eyes too wide. And those eyes had been scribbled out with such violence that the paper was torn through in several places, leaving ragged holes where his gaze should have been. Below the drawing, in Lena's careful handwriting, were 3 words. You look to I. Ethan stared at the image, his hands trembling as he tried to process what he was seeing. This wasn't the work of whatever entity had been possessing his wife. The style was distinctly Lena's. He'd lived with her art long enough to recognize her hand, her particular way of capturing light and shadow. She'd drawn this, his wife, his real wife, had sat down with charcoal and blood and created this horrible image of him with his eyes torn out. The question was, had she done it before or after the house had been destroyed? A sound from the basement made him freeze, a soft scraping, like something being dragged across concrete. Ethan had never liked their basement. It was unfinished, with exposed beams and rough concrete walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They used it primarily for storage, a place to keep holiday decorations and old furniture they couldn't bring themselves to throw away. But as he descended the creaking wooden stairs, flashlight in hand, he realized the basement had been transformed into something else entirely. The walls were covered in symbols, not carved this time, but painted in what looked like layers of different substances. Some were the familiar angular marks he'd been seeing throughout the house. Others were more elaborate, resembling circuit diagrams or architectural blueprints, but for structures that shouldn't be possible, with angles that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the space, someone had arranged their stored furniture into a rough circle. Chairs, boxes, old bookcases, all positioned to face inward toward an empty space in the middle. And in that empty space, scratched into the concrete floor with something sharp enough to score the surface, was a message. The watcher needs to be watched. The watched needs to watch. The circuit closes. The game continues. Ethan played his flashlight beam across the walls, looking for any sign of Lena, any indication of where she might have gone. That's when he noticed that one section of the basement was different from the rest. In the far corner, barely visible in the shadows, was what looked like a makeshift bed, blankets and pillows arranged on the floor, surrounded by empty water bottles and food containers. Someone had been living down here, hiding in the darkness while he'd slept peacefully upstairs. But how long? Days? Weeks? Since the very beginning? A piece of paper, folded and weighted down with a small stone, sat in the center of the makeshift bed. Ethan's name was written on the outside in Lena's handwriting. Inside, the message was brief. Ethan, I tried to warn you. I tried to teach you the rules. But you looked away, and now it's too late for both of us. It's not just inside me anymore. It's inside the house. Inside the walls and the shadows and the spaces between seconds. Every time you weren't watching, it got stronger. Every time you blinked, it grew. I fought it as long as I could, but I'm tired now, so tired, and it's hungry, so very hungry. Don't try to find me. What's wearing my face now isn't me anymore, and if you see it, if you look directly at it, it will know you're here. It will know you came back. Run, Ethan, run and don't look back. Don't look in mirrors. Don't trust your peripheral vision. Don't believe anything that claims to love you. The game never ends. You can only hope to stay ahead of it. I'm sorry. Ethan read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking worse with each pass. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, next to his car keys and his wallet and all the other normal things that belonged to his normal life. A life that, apparently, no longer existed. Behind him, something scraped against the basement stairs, the same sound he'd heard earlier, but closer now. Much closer. Ethan turned off his flashlight and pressed himself against the basement wall, trying to become invisible in the darkness. Above him, footsteps moved across the floor with deliberate slowness, as if whatever was making them was savoring the hunt. Ethan? The voice was Lena's, but wrong, too cheerful, too bright, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Are you down there? I've been waiting for you to come home. The footsteps stopped at the top of the basement stairs. I know you're here, the voice continued, and now there was something else underneath Lena's familiar tone, something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. I can smell your fear. It's delicious. A beam of light, not electric, but something colder, more clinical, began to descend the stairs, sweeping back and forth like a searchlight. You left me alone, the thing said, and now I wasn't even trying to sound like Lena anymore. You broke the rules. You looked away when I needed you most. The light grew brighter, closer. Ethan could see the concrete wall inches from his face, could feel dust motes dancing in the alien illumination. But it's okay, the voice whispered, so close now that he could feel breath against his ear, though nothing was there. I forgive you. We're going to play a new game now, a better game. The light stopped moving, focused on the exact spot where Ethan was hiding. A game where I'm the one who watches. In the perfect stillness of the basement, Ethan heard the sound of something large and impossible descending the stairs with footsteps that didn't quite match the rhythm of human locomotion. He closed his eyes, clutched Lena's letter to his chest, and tried very hard not to think about what would happen when that cold light finally found him. Above, something that had once been his wife began to laugh.